everybody. Thank you for coming to my senior capstone project. So today I'm going to be talking about Harkness at Harwood, both what I've observed over the year as well as my experiences. So I'm going to open up with a pretty simple slide about what is Harkness. So Harkness is a new method of learning, new method of discussion-based learning that was started at Phillips Exeter Academy in New Hampshire. So it's really based around the idea of the one who does the work does the learning. And they execute that by moving from the traditional model where the teacher is at the front of the class, they're the ones doing all the work, they're talking to the students, to the Harkness model, which takes place around the round table. So that's where students are actually leading the discussion, they're digging deeper into text, so they're the ones doing the work, in turn doing the learning. So a Harkness class is a student-driven class. As you can see in these images, that discussion in the back, the teacher is fully separate from the group. The students are completely leading this discussion. And to implement this new style of learning, it's actually based on change from the bottom up. So instead of a top-down order from a principal telling teachers and students to do this, it's actually driven by a group of students and teachers who are working to implement this work in their classes. So in our school, we're growing this work by so we begin with the innovators and the early adopters. So those are the teachers and students who are really engaged in this work. They want to take the risk, they want to work to put this learning into their classrooms. And currently, we've moved all the way to about here, so kind of in the middle of the late majority with, I believe, 26 teachers that have implemented this in their classroom that have underwent this training. So Harkness work is really built upon this foundation, so you need to develop these skills in order to be able to go to the table. So it begins by creating an urgency for learning in students. So a great example of that would be the non-negotiables, which were a set of classroom rules to help promote learning that were actually created by a group of students in the strategies class. So those innovators, that first group. So then, that first group will go into freshman classes and they'll teach the soft skills, which are these necessary skills of discussion. So there's skills such as eye contact, body language, tone of voice, etc., which are all necessary for Harkness. Once students in ninth grade have a base of that, they move into teamwork. So that's kind of these smaller, much more facilitated, smaller discussion groups. So it's groups of like 3 to 4 students roughly with assigned roles, and that's practice for moving to the table. After that, when students have had a little bit of practice, it's where you see them start to use these skills in the classroom. So teachers will have students annotate text, really focusing on using text references and managing airtime. That application classroom is definitely something that students will continue to develop over the years. And then finally, once all of this has been gone through, you'll finally go to the table. So freshman year, as I mentioned earlier, is really where a lot of these soft skills and the foundation is built. This example over here is a picture of some strategy students leading facilitating a lesson in body language. And then here, there's an example of a freshman year Harkness. As you can see, the teacher is much more engaged. So what is a Harkness? It's still, teachers are much more engaged. So sophomore year is when it kind of starts moving over to this more student-driven discussions. So a great example of this is students actually start leading these discussions in classes. So here's a picture of me leading a discussion in my 3Ds class. And while there is some student-led discussion, there's still a bit of that really more heavily facilitated aspects that there are in freshman year. We can see in this table. So it has these very extensive detailed prep sheets as well as the nameplates. So junior year is where the students really start to gain skill in the essential skills of Harkness and bring these to everyday use in the classroom outside of the table. So they'll go to text in a regular classroom discussion. If the teacher will ask a question, they'll answer with a reference to text. They'll try and dig deeper in regular classroom outside of Harkness. Then senior year is where students are really well versed in the skills of Harkness. So here I've brought a oval tracker, and each arrow tracks how many times someone talked. But then on the sides, there's also what type of comments they made. So there's a couple really great things about this. The first is a fairly clear one. There's a really good balance between how much each student talked. And if you look closer, you can see that over there and over there, the teachers were actually present at the table, but they only made about 4 comments. So this was really, despite a teacher being present at the table, a student-driven discussion. You can also see, if you look at the comments made, there's a really solid balance between questions, which is a Q, comments, which is a C, and text references, which is a T. So it's a really high-level, in-depth discussion. So here I'm going to talk about an example of a class that I think has had some really strong Harkness. And one of the ways I saw that was by kind of integrating these aspects of Harkness prep into the classroom. So because students were so well prepared and so well versed with the subject material, we were able to go into class, and instead of doing a prep sheet beforehand, we go into small groups, and in this example, it was a frank discussion of the book Frankenstein. So we went into small groups and discussed each character, and then we would find like certain quotes that we found would support arguments we wanted to make. And then when we went to the discussion, we'd reference these posters instead of prep docs. So we'd build into class the time we'd usually use at home for prepping. Untold Stories is another great example of a class that really uses Harkness effectively. So because of Untold Stories' sometimes challenging subject matter, they do a really good job of making sure students are comfortable before we move to discussion. A great example of how they do that is by setting up foundational vocabulary. So it gives students a good base understanding of the subject matter, which allows for everyone to share their opinions and for much more in-depth, much deeper questions to be asked that students might not be comfortable with otherwise. So where I think Harkness really shines is in community-based dialogue. A great example of that is the Harwood Socrates cafes. So this particular question, much like Untold Stories, can be very challenging, and what really shines about this is that not only was every single group facilitated by students, the question was also designed by students. So this was a fully student-driven community event that had around 100 attendees. So it really shows students taking this work and using it to give back to their community. Another great example that's much more recent is the What's in a Name discussion. So this was a powerful discussion, community dialogue, about how we react to the information that Partridge Thatcher was a slaveholder. This was facilitated by students as well as community members, often working together. So a student would facilitate a group together with a community member. This was a large event that was really essential to our community, and it was mostly student facilitated. So again, similar to Socrates Cafe, students are taking these skills they learned and giving back to the community. So now moving on to my experience with Harkness. So beginning in freshman year, it was all about really creating that idea of student agency. So I saw this style of learning that I loved, and worked really well for me, and I wanted to take it further. And that I took that student agency and I brought it into sophomore year, where I joined the strategies class. So I was working together with teachers to start implementing this in my school. I was facilitating lessons for freshman students. I went to some other schools to facilitate lessons there. And then I think what a really great opportunity I had was to present at the Vermont Alliance for the Social Studies conference. And we were presenting by using students as change agents for school transformation. This was a really great experience, seeing my voice being heard on a much larger scale than I thought was really possible, and seeing that change being created someplace other than Harwood. So junior year was a fairly similar year, except I'd been working with this for now like 3 years, and I had a much better understanding of Harkness. So I was still working the strategies class, but I had a better understanding. For example, again, I went to the League of Innovative Schools conference and did a very similar presentation. However, as a older student, a junior student, I had a better understanding, and I was able to provide more of like almost a mentorship role, where I was helping these sophomore students that I was presenting with become comfortable with the subject matter, help them figure out what they would do as someone who had gone through this process before. So my senior year is where I kind of stepped away from strategies and began taking what I'd done with Harkness and making it my own. So I was facilitating community and Harwood discussions. So AWOD discussions, which is about a film, and I brought that to both the high school students, and then just recently we actually brought the discussion down to middle school students. And then community discussions, I helped with the What's in a Name discussion, which was an incredible experience. Being involved with that, I learned a lot, and I think I helped great with that discussion. And then what I've done this year and over last year with my capstone, it's two dissertations about Harkness, and I've read both of them, and I've learned a little bit more about the why of Harkness, and read about different ways that people have worked with Harkness in different schools. And I've even brought it outside of, brought into the future with my individual essays for college applications. So I took an excerpt from my UVM essays, which essentially, so these experiences that I've had have shown me the potential for positive change in the ways we discuss diverse thought, using discourse as a tool for unity rather than division. And then this year, and the end of last year, but mostly this year, has been a really different year for Harkness with the switch to mostly online learning. So while there's been many challenges with that, it's been much harder to get involved in these discussions. It's gotten great opportunities. So discussions such as the What's in the Name discussion was fully online, and there were guests that most likely couldn't attend. Same with both of the I Am From Here discussions, especially the recent one with the middle school. We were able to very easily facilitate a discussion for middle school students. I was at my house. I might not have been able to make it to that otherwise. So I think there's a great possibility for really bringing people into these discussions. And like I said in the past, using discourse as a tool for unity rather than division, using these virtual tools. So I really want to try and take what I've learned from this work beyond Harwood. It's been hugely inspirational, and it's really inspired me through seeing what kind of change I can create. I want to continue both creating that change and inspiring others to create that change. And I hope that Harkness can continue growing and helping others grow at Harwood long after I'm gone. Thank you very much. And if anybody has questions, I'm ready to answer.